Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Matt Geary here for the Geek Pride cast on this Sunday evening. With me tonight, we have the usual face of Peter Ray Allison.
Good evening, everyone.
And our special guest tonight, we have Khaldoun Khelil. Khalili, sorry.
Khalil, yeah.
Khalil, sorry, I was right the first time. My apologies. Oh, today is going off so well.
Good start, Matt. Good start.
I know. So, Khaldoun, tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What's your thing?
Well, I write for role-playing games. I write for Vampire the Masquerade. I've written for some Cthulhu books and some, freelance Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing. But yeah, mostly I've written on Vampire and Chronicles of Darkness, the old Vampire line, after they, closed down Masquerade for a few years. But now I mostly work on V5, Vampire 5th edition.
Like V5 is very different to like the original Vampire the Masquerade. It feels like almost like a reboot, but still maintaining continuity. Would that be a fair assessment of V5?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a reboot in the sense that the lore is still there, but very much it's not really in the spotlight anymore. So the lore is there and you can delve into the lore, but it's a lot more approachable to new players because they don't have to read a mountain of lore. I remember when Vampire was in its heyday in the 90s, you'd walk into any role-playing game store and there'd be an entire wall of Vampire supplements, sometimes with, strange names, and it would be hard to make heads or tail of it, I'm sure, if you were a new player. V5 really doesn't put the lore front and center. So in a sense, it's a reboot in that sense, in its presentation and themes. But technically, it's still the same game.
Yeah. As well, I'm a massive World of Darkness fan, but I mean, Mattison, so could you kind of, I suppose some of our audience aren't as up to date with V5. So could you explain what V5 is and its background and basis?
Sure. Well, I mean, Vampire the Masquerade, the 5th edition, basically it takes the essential conceit of Vampire the Masquerade that you are playing the vampire and that you're fighting against, this internal beast to retain your humanity. That's kind of the core gameplay. And you're trying to hide yourself and vampiric society from mortals at large while you try to, survive and prosper. And in 5th edition, one of the major twists is that there's secret governmental agencies that know about vampires and are actively hunting them across the world. So keeping yourself a secret is more important than it had been in the past, where it was kind of almost a side project. Keeping yourself hidden, unless that was specifically the focus of the game you were playing. But now it's an issue throughout the game and has more of a spotlight, as well as in older editions of Vampire the Masquerade, there was something kind of called the War of Ages, which was basically about the young vampires versus the old vampires. In 5th edition, the spotlight's firmly on the young vampires, and the older vampires have mostly exited the scene. There's several reasons for that in the plot of the game for why the older vampires are no longer, in your face, basically controlling everything.
So it's basically the game essentially sets up a massive power vacuum.
Correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, one thing I really liked with V5 was it's when I said reboot, I suppose it reboots the system in many ways. It's essentially very much a different system, especially in terms of feeding and. Well, before it's like a blood pool where you kind of tracked how many blood points you had and feeding and using abilities. Here, it's more about the need to feed rather than the actual feeding itself.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I would say that I'd say the original Vampire the Masquerade, when it came out in the 90s, it was groundbreaking thematically. Groundbreaking in the type of role play experience it was asking you as a player and a storyteller to produce at the table. But mechanically, it was very much an old school system. It was very combat heavy. I mean, to be honest, it was basically just Shadowrun with D10s. So it was very mechanically, let's just be honest. So it really didn't break any ground mechanically, except maybe the blood pool system in some way. But yeah, now V5 is a complete overhaul of the system. It no longer focuses on combat. Combat is basically, you're basically supposed to be over with combat in 3 rounds, basically, and whoever has the edge is basically the one who takes the game in a sense. So that individual discipline powers are now a lot more impactful because they have to basically make a difference in just a few rounds. And also, yes, as you said, the blood pool is gone. Now hunger is done in a more what I would say is a much more streamlined way, and the kind of way that hunger can come upon you without you being ready for it. You can no longer gauge it. It's no longer a mini game, hunger. Now hunger is something that can suddenly sneak upon you. You make a bad roll on a hunger roll. You've been using disciplines all night without any problem, didn't get any hungrier, then suddenly you feel the hunger come upon you as you've pushed your luck a little too far. I think that's and that, which I feel is more in line with modern RPGs, is a mechanic that enforces the themes, which in older RPGs was just not really something that was done with most games.
So how does that work? I'm a complete noob when it comes to Vampire the Masquerade. I play D&D and I've done a bit of Call of Cthulhu, and that's pretty much it. How does that work? So you make a bad roll, you become hungry. Does that mean how does that work? How does that make you sort of make the character react?
Well, I mean, it depends. So strictly on the hunger system, basically what you have is something called hunger dice. As your hunger rating increases, technically it's from 0 to 5. You swap out dice in your die pools because, as I said, it's basically still kind of like Shadowrun. You're using D10 die pools, and as you get hungrier, you're basically swapping out a number of dice in all your die pools equal to your hunger rating. So if your hunger is 3, you would swap in 3 dice to the die pool that you'd have to mark specially. And then if those dice come up successes or failures, then some things can be triggered. Messy criticals, bestial failures, and that can play itself out in the role playing. So if you succeed on a roll, even if it's a critical success, but it was your hunger dice that let you succeed on that roll, then you will succeed, but you will have basically relied on your vampiric nature to succeed. So that could threaten the masquerade, that kind of thing. And then obviously it can also trigger, your specific compulsions for your clans and such. And there are also other systems that reinforce it thematically as well, not just the hunger system.
Yeah, because it bakes in the whole kind of vampiric need to feed into the system, where before it was more like a resource tracking management system. Right. And I found like vampire, especially in the early days, it could either be like a vampiric version of EastEnders, all the way up to Avengers with a blood fetish. Right.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean, a lot of games. I mean, my very earliest vampire games that I got to play in, because I'm still a forever DM, so very rarely would I get to ever play. But I remember the very first vampire games I got to play in, I think like 2 or 3 characters had katanas and trench coats. So
the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the katanas and trench coat was very much a thing for the 90s, and also like it was massively just. I think partly because of Underworld films.
Yeah, Underworld, Blade, The Crow.
Exactly, yeah, and like it's just like very much an aesthetic choice, which kind of blended itself very well to vampire. Unfortunately, stuck there.
Yes.
So how did you become involved in writing for Vampire?
Yeah, that's a tough question, I guess. I'm not 100% sure. Basically, my first book for Vampire the Masquerade was, I believe, for the 2nd edition or maybe revised. It was in 2000. I believe it was Cairo by Night. I was a project consultant on that, and I wrote a few things in the book, though I'm only credited as a project consultant. And for that one, they needed somebody who knew something about Cairo, obviously, and back then it was I don't know if it was easier, but it was more common to just be in touch with the people writing the games, and not in a social media way, but on the phone at conventions. I think I met Justin Achille back then at a vampire LARP, though I don't think he was playing in the LARP, to be honest. So I just got the call from the authors, and they asked me to consult on the book, because I know about Cairo and Arabic culture and Muslim culture, and then from there it was just a matter of using my network and meeting people and talking to them, and and doing the writing. That's often the most important thing is if you do the writing, even if it's not really good at first, if you get it in on time, that can account for a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if editors have got something to work on, they're happy. It's when editors don't have anything to work on, that's when they get a bit, grumpy.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah, and I found like from my experience as a freelance writer and journalist, I've raised some of my early stuff way back in the early 2010s. Think, oh, I could do that so much better now, but because I was meeting every deadline, editors were coming back to me and said, okay, and give me more stuff because I was hitting the deadline. I wasn't letting them down, and I think that counts just as much as writing ability now. Just having that ability to hit the deadlines and do what the editor says.
Right. Yes. Now I can miss deadlines.
I'll never say yes to that. I'll never admit to that. Honest.
So, it says the Black Hand behind you. What's the reference to that then?
Oh yes. So V5. There's of the sects in V5. The one of the sects in Vampire the Masquerade that's always been there, and has been not necessarily core to the game in the past, but has either been antagonist but usually playable, is the Sabbat, the quote unquote evil vampires. And so we just released 2 books actually. The V5 book for the Sabbat, it's called Sabbat the Black Hand, and that's the Renegade official Sabbat. That's just an antagonist book. Not a monster manual, but really a storyteller's guide for how to bring the Sabbat into your chronicle and how your players who aren't playing Sabbat would interact with them. Then recently they allowed for V5 products on the Storyteller's Vault, which is the community content. And so I and a few other authors got together and we produced The Black Hand Playing the Sabbat, which is the cover behind me, by Mark Kelly, who's incredible cover artist. And for that, we basically took the foundation of the V5 book, the official book, and made a book for fans and the communities if they wish to play Sabbat. Because in my experience, having played Vampire for so long, Sabbat fans, they love to play Sabbat. Like that's why they come to Vampire for, and we felt that we could present them something that would hopefully scratch that itch.
How would you describe the Sabbat? I mean, there's so many different kind of interpretations of who and what they are. How would you describe them?
Well, yeah, that's tough. I mean, I guess in their classically, the Sabbat is in some sense a cult. It is a organization, of a religious organization in a sense of vampires that have totally shed their humanity and oppose the other vampires who wish to keep pretending that they're just dead humans, that they're not something completely different, and they're fooling themselves that the elder hidden vampires aren't controlling everything. And since vampires are better than humans, the vampire should be in control of everything anyway. That's kind of the basic core of the Sabbat. I guess in the newest edition, they are less interested in the politics and the kind of status quo, this kind of Cold War situation they'd been with the other vampires for so long. They're now in what I would consider to be something we can all appreciate. They're in this mode of we've got to do something now. It's too late, to wait. We can't do piecemeal measures anymore. In our introduction to the book, we have a line that says, if it's the end of the world, what are we waiting for? Which I feel is a line that all millennials can appreciate, because really what the Sabbat is facing in their point of view is Gehenna. They're facing a rising up of these ancient vampires that are going to kill them all the younger vampires, and who knows what they're going to do after that. So in the face of that, what wouldn't you be willing to do in a sense to save the world?
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember playing like the first edition Vampire the Masquerade, where the Sabbat were purely an antagonistic organization. Then it kind of, as editions went on, they became a playable faction. But then with V5, they made the decision of kind of rolling them back and being too purely antagonistic. So why was that? Why did they kind of just, when the Renegade's official release, be purely a sort of GM handbook rather than a playable faction?
Well, I mean, I'm not there when they make those decisions, but I would say that from my point of view, I would say that it's because V5 very much gets back into the roots of Vampire the Masquerade, which is the battle to retain your humanity, that kind of personal horror story. I mean, the politics. I mean, I think the tagline for V5 is actually a game of political horror. So the politics still figure importantly, and as you play Vampire, often you can kind of ignore the mortals on some level once you've insulated yourself from the mortal world. But with some of the mechanics, not just hunger, but the touchstone mechanics and the conviction mechanics and the chronicle tenant mechanics, they've basically recentered the idea that this is a game of you and your humanity, and basically what you're willing to do to get along in the vampiric world, and how much you're willing to sacrifice humanity. So the Sabbat, which follow paths of enlightenment, which are intrinsically inhumane, that's not really the game they're playing. So they don't want to basically, this is strictly my opinion, I don't think they wanted to dilute the core gameplay experience with the Sabbat as a playable faction. That would be my guess.
Yeah, because very much V5 kind of recenters the whole point of Vampire the Masquerade in the sense of kind of refocusing it back onto the personal horror of you're a vampire, what you're going to do to kind of keep your humanity alive. And again, like the touchstones is kind of centers the play on that and focuses them that the need to keep them alive and present and to retain their humanity. And I mean, I've read the Black Hand source book you worked on, and that's fantastic. I mean, the quality of it. I mean, when you say like it's a community storyteller vault content, but it's really professionally done. I mean, like the design of it, the artwork, and the layout, and just it's not just a bunch of PDF pages all typewritten. This is, which is, I mean, especially when it's just someone working on it, this is like really looks like a professional. Well, as it is a professional piece of content that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, we have been getting that feedback a lot. I mean, I think that's partly because we got Mark Kelly, who was very kind to do the cover for our book. And so obviously just from the jump, it looks like a lot of the other, official products because it has that, quality cover. And we did our best to, use the same fonts and layouts. The Storyteller Vault has, for the most part, the templates and art packs that they give as a default are very good. And so just from those bones, I think if you put in the time, and it is a lot of time, you can put things together. And I did the art layout and the development and all of that. And I actually have some professional experience with that myself, from desktop publishing in the 90s and early aughts. So my first professional jobs in the energy industry were with newsletters, writing about, oil and natural gas and that kind of thing. So I was able to kind of brush up those old skills, see what InDesign looks like now, and put it to use. So yeah, we definitely wanted to deliver a book that, if it was printed, you'd be happy to have it on your shelf next to the other Sabbat book or the Camarilla or the core book and such.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Matt.
It's just because again, I'm completely naive to the whole sort of kind of world that it is. Now we've talked to a few people about Mage.
Love that game.
So you're talking about keeping your humanity, and sort of the Masquerade is sort of obviously not showing that you are a vampire, which seems similar along the lines of a mage, where you don't want to be seen as being a mage. You got to hide it. Is there sort of kind of a connection between them, or are they in the same world? Aren't they? Are they in the same?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're in the same world.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Well,
okay.
I mean, there's technically no 5th edition of Mage. Well, not technically. There is no 5th edition of Mage out currently. I don't know what they're going to do with that line. But yes, Mage classically is one of the World of Darkness, playable splats or arenas.
Is there?
Yeah, but
Do they ever have any sort of like interaction between the cross pollination between mage and vampires?
Yes, I mean, in V5 that doesn't really seem to be a focus of the game. What's called crossover in World of Darkness. It's very very classically called crossover, and there are lots of heated arguments about whether crossover is good. And different editions of the game promoted crossover to different levels. Earlier, they very kind of downplayed crossover, and all the different splats had basically kind of antagonist blocks. So like a mage in the first edition, in the first few editions of Vampire, I think it would basically be, this is, the stat block for a mage. Like, don't bother buying the mage book. But obviously, once they had, mage books and lots of mage books, they tried to do the crossover thing, I would say to limited success. I never really saw very much crossover. Because usually the mechanics were so different. I think Chronicles of Darkness, where Vampire the Requiem and Mage the Awakening and all that does it a little better because it's more of a unified system mechanically. I don't know. I can't really talk about the other World of Darkness books that I've worked on other than Vampire because none of them are out yet. But I really can't say how well the mechanics will drive together going forward.
Yeah, well, I remember playing like V20, M20, and all that. And whilst essentially they are the same system, the storyteller system, but when it starts diverging is in their respective powers. Like the vampires have disciplines, the mages have the spheres, and at that point it starts getting very flaky. And it can be done with a lot of care and thought. I played a mage in a World of Darkness LARP way back in the day, and that got interesting when the character had forces and could conjure fire at will. That became very interesting for everyone else, especially the vampires. Now, but again, it just became a bit. And now, what I would say is thematically they are similar. Like vampires have the Masquerade to hide behind. Mages have the kind of paradox, so they can't really overtly display their powers, otherwise they get hit by the paradox hammer. And werewolves, like Werewolf the Masquerade, they have their own form of obfuscation. Like they're basically, if a human sees
the veil,
thank you, yes, completely blanks on that. Yeah, basically, if a normal human sees a werewolf in full Krynos form, in their full werewolf form, they just go run screaming and think, oh, it's not real, it can't be real. So thematically they are similar, and mechanically at a certain level they are similar, but their respective powers just start going off in different directions. At that point, you can't really. I think, as I understand it, Chronicles of Darkness kind of baked in the crossovers from the very beginning. Would that be a fair assessment, or at least their interoperability?
Yes, yeah. I mean, later on they would bake in more crossover. I think they actually made a campaign which was very crossover heavy. Yeah. So that was a bit later on, but yes, from the outset, the mechanics were meant to be totally interchangeable. There was one core book for all the lines. So if you wanted to play Vampire or Werewolf, you had to buy the World of Darkness book to get the core mechanics. So I would agree with that. The interoperability was there. But if you, as a storyteller, wanted to make a game that was crossover, heavy, or had different kinds of players from different areas or splats, you would really have to give that some, careful thought.
Very much so. I mean, I think the only game where they kind of really, especially in the classic World of Darkness games like the M20, Mage 20, and so on, is in the Technocracy Reloaded book, where basically all the other supernatural elements were targets for the technocracy, and that way that wasn't so much a crossover, but target practice for the technocracy essentially, because they were on a hunt for any reality deviants, and that included vampires, werewolves, and so on. But yeah, but again, like, how did you become involved in V5 itself? How did that come about?
Well, that's a good question too. I think I met. Okay, well, this is going to sound weird. Okay, but I was living in Los Angeles for a while, and I was dropping my son off at summer camp. He was going this, comedy summer camp in Hollywood. So I was dropping him off at summer camp in Hollywood, where I was living at the time. And after I dropped him off across the street, I saw Martin Erickson sitting on a street corner, talking to a friend of his, I guess. It was very early in the morning too. I didn't have to be at work for a while. So I just crossed the street and I said, hey, Martin. And I think we'd met in the past, I think at a convention or something. And so we just sat down and started chatting. And then, I think through Martin, I met, everybody else, Kareem and Johanna and a few other the V5 people. I think Jason Carl, I don't think he was actually working for Paradox at that point. So yeah, it was chance and going to conventions, and then just chatting, and that was that. And then I think the first thing I wrote for V5 was for the Camarilla book. They asked me to take a look over the Banu Hakim stuff before it was published. So I mean, I wasn't really a sensitivity reader, but I gave them some notes here and there on that stuff. They took most of them, if not all. I think it turned out okay. Well, not okay. It turned out very good, especially compared to some of the stuff from the old Assamites. Yeah. And then officially, the first thing I ever wrote for V5 was the Camarilla book rewrites. Actually, I rewrote the Gehenna War section and some meta plot about the Beckoning and the Gehenna War and all that.
Yeah, because I do know the Camarilla source book kind of got a bit of flack when it was initially released, but to their credits, Paradox took action, basically kind of just cancelled the book. Rather kind of brought the book back in, rewrote it, and then reissued it again with their apologies. I think that was a well managed essentially. To get, we need to redo this. And
unheard of. I mean, I don't know if I've ever heard of that ever happening in the how many decades I've been playing RPGs. I mean, they even had an editorial review board. I was part of an editorial review board that reviewed both the Anarch and the Camarilla book. Basically, we all separately went through the books and then, submitted our editorial notes, which I don't know about everyone else's, but I know some of mine were implemented in at least the Camarilla book, not really the Anarch book, because the Anarch book had a few things that they were concerned about, but for the most part, I feel the Anarch book didn't get nowhere near as much heat as the Camarilla.
Yeah. I mean, is it worth mentioning just like the scale of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
because basically they were referencing real world atrocities as basically being the results of vampire manipulation, and it was untasteful is the best way I can politely put it. But like I said, the Paradox did take action, brought the book back in, redid it, and reissued it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I have no idea about the behind the scenes or the before all that. I can only speak of the reaction because that was what I was involved with. But I can say that the reaction is very good, and I think that most experienced writers who work and developers who work with dark material will tell you that you can talk about the monsters, but you should never excuse the real world monsters of the humans doing bad things. Yeah.
Very much agree. Like as I recall, I mean, barring a few exceptions, again, in the generally World of Darkness approach to being atrocities and real world monsters has been that wasn't vampires or werewolves and mages. No, that was just evil people being evil.
Yes, I think by Revised they had perfected that formula of vampires, and definitely in Chronicles of Darkness with the Vampire the Requiem,
Yeah.
they perfected this formula that vampires will take advantage of human atrocities, but they are not the perpetrators or the originators of those thoughts. That's strictly with the humans. And personally, from a writing horror context, it's always scarier when a human does something terrible because they don't have the excuse of, well, the beast made me do it. Like, well, no, you don't have that. You don't have a beast.
Yeah, very much. I think it's like having someone that takes advantage of it is, you can reference real world elements, but it never excuses it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And again, like, how did you become involved in like the Sabbat book? Like,
oh well, I've been speaking with people at White Wolf, as it was back then, since the very early days of V5 before the book came out, about what the Sabbat would be like in the new edition, and writing a book for them about it and the such in some capacity. Since back then. So I think my name had always been in the mix of potential writers for the book. So when it finally came down time to write the book, it was one of the first times in my career where someone called me. So they said we're going to do this.
Savor that experience.
Huh?
Savor that experience.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't happen often. It doesn't matter how long you've been writing, especially or freelancing. I mean, the quickest way to starve in writing or freelance is to develop a pick me attitude, like that kind of, well, if they don't pick me, I'm not the best for the job. Well, no. Trust me. Like, people appreciate when you come to them and say, I would like to work on this. Not only does it show your interest and all that, but people are busy. They're not going to remember you, even if you don't have a very unique name like my own.
Yeah, well, I can speak like I'm a freelance writer and journalist myself. Write for the BBC, Computer Weekly, do a fair bit on cybersecurity, and I think I'll say 5 times I've written hundreds, literally hundreds. There's hundreds of articles in the past 5 years. 5 times I've been asked to do something for someone.
Yeah, that's about right. That sounds about that's about the right ratio. 5 to like a billion. Yeah.
And it just you can't. You have to be out there getting, hi, do you want this? Hi, can I do this for you? And you have to really kind of get over that sort of
Is that how you do it, Pete? Because I've never thought about it, to be honest, Pete. That's your livelihood and stuff. Is it? You just sort of kind of, do you go out on business meals and stuff like that? You wine and dine people to get business?
I wish I could bill that as an expense. No, I email people. I will kind of won't derailing too much from but this is for you, Khaldoun, but like I will email people. I will say, hi, I've got this idea for an article, and kind of give them a brief pitch of like what it'll be about, who I'll speak to, and are you interested? And that's pretty much the general. Occasionally I'll kind of speak to, and like I will email in to say, oh, by the way, I'm going to this event. Would you like some interviews from these people? Like, for example, if I'm in November last year, I was at World's Comic Con where I spoke to the actors who played the pilots in Star Wars, the Star Wars film, developer pilots, and said, listen, these people are here, would you be interested in a conversation with them? And actually one person said, yeah, actually I would actually. So that's how it comes about typically. But I can't just basically sit by my keyboard waiting for the email to ping going, hi, we would like you to write an article, because no, I'd starve.
Exactly.
How does that kind of reflect on yourself, Khaldoun?
Well, I mean, starting out, it's very much a face-to-face thing. Like, people want to see you, they want to get an idea of you for RPG writing, at least in my experience. I'm not quite sure what it is now as far as, getting your start. But for me, it was really conventions were kind of a game changer. I'd written here and there, as a hobby while I did, my full-time work. But then once I started getting into conventions and, wanted to get into writing more as a full-time basis, that's when really I saw more work, once I made those personal connections. And then after that, once I know people on a personal level, then yes, I can, email them or Slack them or DM them, whatever is available to me. As long as as long as you're not, tweeting about it out in the open air, then yeah, it's usually any basis to get the work.
Yeah, I think until anything's published, everything is under NDA. You just do not talk about it, especially if you can. I've just got this great content. No, can't say anything. Can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think back in the day, it was a little looser, especially when you were just talking to other professionals in the business or other freelancers. Now, I definitely feel as video game companies kind of come into the RPG space for those IPs and such. And there have more of an impact on the culture of RPGs. Now, yes, now NDAs are completely sacrosanct. Like now, I don't know if can't's the right word, but I definitely don't risk talking to other authors or whatever. I have to be a lot more tight-lipped. It was more collegiate in the past, where you'd be like, oh, I'm working on this, and you discuss things and figure things out, get ideas. Now it's much more siloed, and it's much more about IP. Which isn't a bad thing, because these companies are bringing a lot of resources into the gaming space that we didn't really have in the past. RPGs are very much a tight margin business, and the IPs were never really valued the way they should have been. But now you see companies like Paradox, which value the World of Darkness IP. They value the BattleTech IP. You see the Shadowrun video games, which are so good. They see how important and powerful. Not to mention Cyberpunk by the incredible Mike.
Oh yeah,
which has been around forever as a game, and is now finally getting the kind of accolades it deserves. As an idea, as a thought.
Yeah, I spoke to Mike Pondsmith just after Cyberpunk 2077 was announced. So we're talking early 2013, and it was just before the media blackout came down from CD Projekt Red. And apparently he'd been approached several times by various video game companies, and for one reason or another, it just never happened. Sometimes they approached them with ideas of like, we'll just reskin a first-person shooter, stick to Cyberpunk 2020